Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final session of our training series, Managing Technology Change Projects for Business People. My name is Alan Reed, and I'm a director of GetSavvy. This session tackles two topics that are critical to the success of your project. So the first topic we're covering today is the implementation phase, which is the longest and the most grinding phase, where you're demanding the most time and the most collaboration from your colleagues, and also, of course, from your technology supplier. And the second topic is the transition through to go live, and when you go through your go live and into your new business as usual. This is a fairly neglected area, and what you'll hear today is that it certainly doesn't happen by itself. There's an awful lot of work and preparation and things that you have to put in place to make sure that that goes well. So with me today, I'm delighted to welcome Matt Dunphy. Matt, do you mind just introducing yourself a little bit? Is that okay? Matt, you're on mute. It's traditional. Somebody has to be on mute, and this morning it's you.
I was doing so well, a pound in the jar. Welcome, everyone. I'm Matt Dunphy. I'm actually a manager with a company called Wharton Business Consulting. Yet I have a long-standing partnership and collaboration with both Alan here and Glenda Parker of Get Savvy. Delighted if you're joining us again and you've actually tracked these sessions over the last month, and really excited to cover these topics.
Fantastic, Matt. Thank you. All right. Well, without further ado, so just before we get fully started, the session's recorded and we'll be sending everything to everybody. So please absorb the content and don't worry about making mad notes all over the place. Please do use the Q&A box. One of the most fun parts of these sessions has been answering questions from the audience. So as we go through things, there are doubtless things you're concerned about in your own project or wondering how I might do that. So drop it into the Q&A box throughout, and then Matt and I will answer it at the Q&A session through the webinar. And then also just to make the point that the content for this free training series is taken from our online self-paced AI-driven course called Managing Technology Change Projects for Business People. So delegates on this webinar will get a 50% discount voucher for that. About two-thirds of the people who've been attending the training series have taken advantage of that. It essentially takes you through every stage of a technology project in your own business, tells you everything you need to know, says make sure you do this, and for goodness sake, don't do that. And each stage is covered in about 40 minutes. And the feedback we get is that people really enjoy it. It's very lively, very personable. So do yourself a favor if you're involved in a technology project and get some support for that and for yourself. Okay, so us at Get Savvy, as well as providing project management training and a training platform, we also help with projects and whether it's establishing a project or delivering it all of the way through. We're fiercely independent of any technology or provider. That tends to be really important when we're being asked, oh, what about this type of technology? What about that type of technology? Should I stick with what I've got? Should I replace it? We have to, not be on a bung from any provider in order to give answers that are all about you and your situation. We do a whole series of different types of project services. We'll send you this, but quite often we're asked to help structure a project at the beginning or work out how much something will cost and help advise on which way the organization will go. And sometimes we help all of the way through the project. It tends to be driven by the client need. Right, so on to today's content. So let's just put you in the frame with you as the project manager on your own project and what you need to know. So essentially, there are these attributes here about being organized and planning and collaboration that we've covered over and over, and we'll cover again today in the training series. So one of the points we want to make is that even if you're not the most organized person in your personal life, you go into your kitchen and there's a stack of bills that have been waiting there for months, you can still be a very effective project manager. It's essentially about a series of techniques and tools and document templates and getting up into a practiced way of working. So you can do that in your professional life very successfully, and this is what we're teaching you about and giving the tools to equip you with throughout the training series. Okay, so put yourself in the mind frame. You're the project manager. How would I tackle these things that Alan and Matt are talking about today? What might scare me? What might be difficult? If there's anything you want to ask, please drop it into the Q&A. So we're tackling, as I say, the implementation phase and the go live phase. So this will typically be something you've selected your supplier, you've prepared your organization for the project. You might have done a discovery phase with your supplier, and now you're into the making it happen within your own organization. So that could be 6 months, it could be a year in many projects. And that's where the real work kicks in. So we're going to be talking about that. So as part of the implementation phase, we're taking this in two parts: implementation and then preparedness for go live. So let's talk about how you would prepare yourself. Put your, I'm responsible for this hat on. And what we're going to be covering as part of preparing for your implementation are, first of all, the three phases of implementation, as we've broken it out into the most kind of digestible chunks that you need to learn. How to go about managing scope, so that your project isn't moving around. The goalposts have left a pitch in the middle of your project, and then you're still measured as if the scope hadn't changed. How do you manage who's going to help you and how you're going to get the best out of them? And how you're going to track costs and so on. And then that all important area of making sure it works, the UAT, and making sure that your colleagues have accepted it and signed it off. That's what the user stands for in UAT. Finally, on this module, this part of the webinar, we love a checklist. So we're going to go through what you need to make sure is in place before you set yourself up to fail on an implementation and set yourself up to succeed instead. And then a small quiz to make sure you've been awake through this bit of it. So let's get into all of that. So Matt, if you don't mind, I'd like you to start, please, on just one of my favorite topics. What can go wrong? And I'll just put everything on the slide in front of you. And if we could just get your thoughts on that, please.
Yes, of course. Well, as the adage goes, prior preparation prevents poor performance. You might have heard other versions of that. As we always emphasize at Get Savvy, really your planning at every stage of your project is crucial as a project manager, and that is no different here as you venture forth in implementation. As Alan said, several things can come up as pitfalls, as issues. I'll cover those very quickly now. Resourcing is always going to be a challenge within not-for-profit organizations around technology projects. So really ensuring your plan has got clarity on when people are needed for what activities will help. You do often from various sort of parties get wildly ambitious targets in terms of when your project and implementation needs to be delivered by. So watch out for that. You are the voice of reason saying this is a realistic plan. This, however, isn't, and we need to change it. Staff time is precious, as we all know. So again, any involvement they need in terms of activities like testing, they and their managers need to know about it early. So planning that in early will help them be available versus not. Um, Poor communication. I've seen so many project plans where communication is ignored. You will have a separate communications plan with the detail, but please make sure you've got milestones and kind of checkpoints for your comms in your main plan. Also, process tends to be ignored. Make sure you've got somebody available to be focusing on how your processes are being redeveloped in line with the system. Because the last point here, you're not only training people on the system, you're training them on your process changes as well. And you really need two elements of training. You need some learning activity, some awareness raising early in implementation. And then, of course, you're going to have a comprehensive training plan over a number of weeks and months. So those are kind of ways to avoid some of the common pitfalls in planning. I think if we move on from there, at Get Savvy, we like to consider, managing your plan for implementation in three phases. So I'll cover those very quickly now, and then I'll cover phase one, and Alan will move through the detail of phase two and three. So essentially, phase one is actually about looking back on the documentation that you've actually created or has been created already in your project. The key message here is update as you go. These are living documents. You're going to need to go back to your business case and say, are our objectives still consistent at this point with what we said initially, or do we need to make some updates? etc., etc. You'll have that across a number of key documents. I'll cover that in a moment. Phase two then is actually the execution of implementation. So you're going to need to plan that activity, and then you're going to need to work with teams and your supplier on that. So that's really, your supplier will have the specification that they're creating for your project. They'll also then be developing your system or systems, and then it'll be over to you a bit more for testing planning, training planning, and your go live. And then finally, in phase three, then there'll be an element of this throughout implementation. But of course, towards go live, it's critical that you actually monitor this plan, including any key risks and issues or delays, and that you report on it. And my final bit of advice here would be have a high level version of your plan for senior management team members and have the detail for your project team. People need different levels of detail. So looking at phase one then, anyone who has been with us throughout this course and the various modules, we've talked about several documents that are key in terms of those you need to keep updated. So the business case, largely your focus point here, as I said, are the objectives and the scope of the project consistent throughout the whole timeline, or do we need to make some updates and changes? We'll cover scope a bit later on. You've then got your project initiation document. And the guidance here, I will say, is it's probably referenced some risks up front in your project. The profile of your risk is always changing. So you might need to make some updates here and also down in your RAID log. Then the plan itself, you will probably have a higher level version of the plan in the stages that have come before. When you hit implementation, this is where you're going to expand its detail, and it does become more complex. So make sure you're checking back to what you've said, particularly if you've accrued any delays or lags in the project to date. And then the final point here is roles and responsibilities. You'll have different ways of actually recording this, but simply speaking, you need to check that everybody's still clear on what they're doing within implementation. And sometimes this is where you do get new members joining your project team. And as Alan has just shown, when you've got all of this sorted, you really are ready then to move on to planning and delivering the execution. Alan.
Great, that's really good. And Matt, I couldn't agree more. The whole point of this phase is for you as a project manager to say, do I have everything I need? Really, I would always suggest writing that on a post-it note and sticking it on your monitor every single day. Your question should be, do I have everything I need to do a good job on this next phase of it? As Matt was just talking about, before you start your implementation, are my documents in a good state? Is everyone agreed on what we're doing? Is everyone signed off on it from the business case through the PID, etc.? Do I have everything that I need? And if you don't, hand up, back to the management team to get all of that sorted so that you're not building your project on sand. So having done all of that, and thanks so much for the advice there, Matt, the next thing is you're ready to get on with the implementation part of it. So from here, I think it's worth recognizing that this phase is the most complex of the project. It's the most longest, it can be the most grinding and the most demanding. So all of that preparation and establishment is really important. And then it's vital then that you have yourself got a really clear view of what you're going to be doing. I've just seen a hand up there. Please do feel free to drop a question in the Q&A, and we'd love to come to your question. So as part of your implementation preparation, you're then laying out a plan for how it's going to go. That can be in collaboration with your new supplier. But one of the things that we say over and over again is you can't just use the supplier's plan. You must have your own plan, because the supplier is not going to manage all of your staff. It's not going to manage all of their availabilities and when they can do holidays and Q&A and all of those things. You must have your own plan, or else you're not in control of your own project. So then also recognize the plan is your friend. It's not some task that you have to update later and go, oh, a bit of admin. It's what's going to save you being shouted at and stressed and being constantly surprised by stuff. So make sure you're keeping it up to date all of the time. Matt used the phrase living document. It's supposed to keep you always in a position where you know what's going on and you're adapting to what's on the ground in your plan, so you can anticipate problems and resolve them. So part of that is obviously the people side. This is often neglected. People think, oh, I can just create a Gantt chart and it'll have a it'll look really lovely with all sorts of dependencies. Uh, One of the things that we emphasize over and over is you're better as a project manager always on the shop floor. You can't be sitting in the factory office and not talking to people. Always on the shop floor, out there talking to people because they need to they need to be all have trust that you know what you're doing, that you understand what their role is, and that you can help and support them in doing that. So one of the major overheads on the project that you need to build into your time is the ability to communicate with people either directly one-to-one on a smaller project or en masse with emails and communications and channels through there. And then, of course, letting people know what's going on the project through all of those different methods and keeping people up to date with it. Never be the Lone Ranger on a project. Never hide anything from your management team or don't share the problem more widely. So, and then that honesty and transparency we find to be very important. We've seen over and over that people said, "Oh, the supplier said it's going to take an extra month, but maybe they could bring it in earlier." Don't keep that to yourself because when it does take the extra month, and actually they meant 6 weeks, it then becomes it's on you. So share the problem, share that information, and then it's your role to then say, okay, well, let's look at contingencies. Let's look at what we can do about that, but do it as a group. Okay, monitoring and reporting. As Matt has said, it's something that happens all of the way through the project. But of course, you'll tend to develop your reports and your static ways of managing it. So within the course and as part of templates we provide, there's all sorts of really great documents that if you can keep them up to date minimally as you're doing things anyway, then you'll find it's very easy to share those and keep people up to date with what's going on the project. One of your main tasks as a project manager is not necessarily to solve everything or to prevent every problem from happening. It's just to show that you were in control of what information you had. You're reporting on things so that people can see what's going on, and that you've anticipated what was reasonable to anticipate. Oh, I can see that resources are running out here. I can see that budget is going higher here, and you should be able to see that to some extent in advance. And as I say, be able to share that with people so that those problems could be tackled and resolved. So the reporting and monitoring isn't an optional element of it. It's often the thing that'll save your life as a project manager. So keeping those documents and templates and sharing them is a vital part of the role. Okay. One of the things that we find to be neglected and to people's problems as a project manager is essentially getting stakeholder reporting and feedback from people. So making sure that where there are challenges or people are finding things more difficult or there's something's going to take longer, that's getting reflected properly within the right documents, which include your status reports, the RAID report. The RAID log is essentially risks, actions, issues, and decisions, and that's your one of your most important friends during the project implementation phase, where you're tracking things that come up, things that are going to be a problem or potentially a problem, and what you're going to be doing about it. Tracking what actions you are taking and what has been agreed. And then issues and decisions, so that when people do decide on, all right, we'll do this instead, that's logged and tracked. When people say, oh, why did that happen that way in 6 months' time, you've got an audit trail, and therefore you're able to report on that correctly. A key area of difficulty is often that the scope moves around a lot. So Matt, do you mind if I bring you back in to talk about scope management on the implementation phase of the project, please?
Yes, of course, Alan. Scope actually management is one of my favorite areas of a project. For anyone who hasn't heard us say it or doesn't know this, scope is essentially what is to be delivered in your project versus exclusions, things that won't be included. And the key message here really is to avoid what we call scope creep. And again, a simple definition of that is where against any approval, either certain items are being delivered within the project by the supplier or are being left out or left behind. And that's not always the supplier's responsibility. You as a project manager need to stay on top of this. However, what I would say is don't be alarmed. Change requests do arise. So it's important when they do come up for you to actually accept that and then run through a process of actually analysing and evaluating the request that's been raised. And I think, Alan, if we move forward from here, we'll actually share with you a process for managing change control. My best advice here is commit this to memory, take a picture of it, you'll get it afterwards, put it on your wall. Really do run this process every time because change control needs this level of discipline. So to cover this very quickly, of course, at an initial stage, you're going to get a request. Now that might be from the project team. It might more likely be from your supplier saying, someone's raised this, it's not in the RFP, it's not in our scope yet, what do we do? Step two there is obviously you're going to analyze or assess the request for its level of priority and validity. So priority, how urgent is this to deliver right now? Validity, is this a reasonable request or is it, as we call it, a nice to have for the future? Let's say you've understood that it is a reasonable request. You're next going to analyze and assess the impact of both delivering this item or request or not delivering it. So delivery impact will be things like added time potentially or cost. And not delivering will usually mean a difficult conversation with a stakeholder. So you do need to evaluate that. Again, let's say that it's moving forward. You're next going to make a recommendation at step four to your governance board, your senior management team or others. What I'd suggest here is expect a couple of rounds of review. Senior management team members have that awful task of not seeing all the detail and yet having to make the decision. So the more you can provide them with evidence and answer their questions, the better. Step five then is simple. You will receive promptly, we hope, a yes or a no answer to the request. And step six, then you need to do a number of things. Record the decision in the decisions log in your RAID log, so that the rationale is clear and it's available if anyone asks in the future. If it's a yes decision, talk to your supplier and your project team about getting going on the change request. If it's a no, talk to the person who raised the request and offer the rationale for why the request has been rejected or declined at this point in time. And I
Fantastic.
think if we move on from there, Alan, if you want to offer anything on change control from your point of view.
No, no, that's great. So I was just going to say we've had a question popped into the Q&A, so please do remember your own Q&A questions. That's great. Thank you, Matt. I'll just move on from that one.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll take this back and actually a really nice section here on resource management. Remember, as a project manager in implementation, it's not just about having a big list of activities that need to be doled out to whoever's available. You need to consider people's strengths and actually become, highly proficient at delegating tasks. So a couple of tips here, we all have different skills and capabilities, and some of them we don't always share. So the more you can get to know your team, the better you'll be at identifying who's strongest to do a particular task. Similarly, we all communicate differently. To give you two examples, you might have very analytical communicators. They might need more information and more detail in order to process, the brief around a task. If you're intuitive like me, you're probably more like to hear, here's the task, here's a bit of information about fulfilling it. This is the time frame for completion, and this is the criteria for coming back to me if there's a problem. So we're all different. Moving on then, yeah, just it is an ongoing task and implementation to be delegating things. You don't want your own workload to be disproportionate. And again, this matching exercise will really help you because people love doing what they're good at. They love when you are playing to their strengths for two key reasons. It offers them flow. So they are in a flow of completing tasks that they are good at, and also it gives them confidence and momentum. Now, it's not to say we don't like healthy challenge for any members of our team or our network, but really playing to people's strengths in terms of task management is crucial.
Fantastic. And
Alan.
please, people, let us know what your situation is. Are you one person who's expected to do all of the work, or is there do you have a whole horde of helpful Labrador puppies enthusiastically saying, "What can I do to help?" So let us know. Okay. So then from there. there's a really important part of being a project manager, which is about looking after the project budget. And the reality is that although, of course, most of us feel like we're not accountants and we're not used to tracking costs at this level, the cost side of it is one of your earliest indicators that things are going well or things are not going well. So we provide within the course really helpful budget tracker templates that you can use on day one and just plug things in and it'll do the work for you. But nonetheless, you need to be doing it. It's the discipline of you doing it that really matters. So a big part of it is you as the project manager with that post-it note in front of you saying, do I have everything I need? The question you should always be asking yourself saying, right, do I have sufficient budget to manage the things I need with the supplier, all of the different elements that the supplier is doing? Do I have a budget to manage things with my old supplier who I need help with as well, and resources, etc.? And then tracking how those are used and how they're consumed. So what you've got to be doing is tracking across a number of different headings, and then working out whether there's a problem in any of these areas that you need to be flagging as early as possible, not after the budget in one area has run out, but in anticipation of it running out, so that you can then be seen to be doing a great job and you're in control of everything that's going on with the project. So there are three main elements to you looking like a hero instead of looking like you were, tripped over by something on the costs. So the first one is establishing your baseline, which is okay. So we've got the supplier's proposal and their tender responses, and before we signed full contracts with them, we've got this breakdown of the costs for their whole project that they've committed to and we've committed to. So all of that then needs to be laid out, and of course you would break it out month by month of when the billing schedule has been agreed for things to be actually paid. And part of your role is making sure that everything is in there. So if there is a cost or an invoice that's coming in, it's coming in against something you've already anticipated. To avoid those surprises. Then, of course, tracking and managing updates. So as you do get an invoice through, or there's some update to the budget from anywhere, that's updated into your budget tracker. So that can be really helpful to you. If the supplier said, "Oh, this is going to cost us, £10,000 over 3 months to do this work," and then you're 2 weeks in and you get a bill for £10,000. There's a problem here. There's a big misunderstanding. What is it actually going to cost more than £10,000? Do we misunderstand the billing schedule with it? Those kind of things will flag and alert you to problems early, and then you're able to take action and deal with it. And then, of course, forecasting forwards. So you're always looking, multiple months ahead on your budget. And then you can see where these problems are going to arise. If you're going to run out or there's some kind of issue, you're sharing that with the management team, and you can talk about options for dealing with it. If you're doing those things, and as I say, the templates will help you. It's not something you have to invent. Then you're well on the way to not being tripped up on your own project and not having trouble on your own project. Okay, so then the other thing is supplier management that we thought it'd be very useful to talk about. Let me just lay it out on the screen. Supplier management is an area of multiple disputes on many projects, and it's because of poor understandings and poor expectations set between you. So one of the main things that to make sure you're not having arguments and you're having a collaborative, trust-based relationship with your supplier is making sure that you're clear on everything. Who's doing what? When are they going to do it? When are we going to pay for it? What happens if we're not happy with it? What happens, how much time do we have to put in at our side in order to allow you to deliver those things? What meetings are you going to attend in terms of board meetings and project meetings, etc.? And what do we do if we're not happy that a deliverable has been met? All of these things need to be discussed and agreed well before the project starts to avoid arguments and surprises. If you're inheriting a project where all of those things are substantially nailed down, your first duty, post-it note, do I have everything I need, is to make sure that you've reviewed all of this, you're completely clear of it, and if there's anything that's giving you pause or giving you a problem, then straight back to the management team to say, I can see something going wrong with this here. Can we just get this clarified? Even if we think it's already nailed down, let's make sure it's clear so that you're not having arguments and disputes with your supplier later, and you can just focus on the good work of the project and instead of the petty stuff. Okay. This point about being fair and honest, there can be a reflexive urge to just blame the supplier for everything, and it's almost never the case that a problem is just one-sided. And in fact, the supplier very often is in a better position than you to be delivering this project because it's all they do for a living. Whereas you, of course, you've got to run your membership body or your charity or whatever it is. So quite often, almost always, there's a mixed responsibility. If you're reflexively blaming them for everything, then the next time you've got a genuine complaint or where they have made a mistake or something, you just sound like the person who cried wolf. You're always blaming them. So then, it won't be taken as seriously as it would otherwise if you were being transparent all of the times before. Okay, so top tips with that, just to move on, is you need to be in charge of your own project plan. Do not just be someone traipsing along behind your supplier. They're not really that interested in the majority of your resources and the majority of your people. And if that's not being tracked, managed, and anticipated and booked in, then all sorts of problems will happen with the project. The user acceptance testing takes an awful lot of time. And the modern ways we're doing projects these days, we try and expose users to the system as early as possible. So training is happening testing is happening almost from day one. With modern systems that are substantially, already being used elsewhere, it's not a development project anymore. As soon as something's shown to you, people should get their hands on it and try and break it. That we find that way to be a much more human way of doing UAT rather than bunching it all up to the end, but allow lots of time for it. And then, of course, what we also have to make sure is that the UAT lies with you as a responsibility, you and your internal organization, because eventually your supplier is going to just be in help desk mode. It's you that's going to be running the software to run your business. So you need to own that responsibility and make sure that you're happy with it before it goes any further, anywhere towards a go live. Okay, Matt, I'll just invite you to comment really briefly on this. You talked about project scope management. What we see all of the time, of course, is that new areas of scope change come out during the project. These realizations of, oops, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could do that? Or we need to add that into the project now. And of course, your job as project manager is to make sure that your project is delivered successfully and is not seen as a failure. What kind of things do you tend to do if somebody comes up and says, "Oh, I've got this fantastic idea. Let's do this new thing on the project"?
Yeah, so couple of things, I guess. The process that you've shared is really crucial. As I say, it is a discipline because I suppose one of the risks or tendencies is it can become a lot of discussion about a lot of change requests without a structure. As long as you've got your process in place, in essence, anything could come up. I suppose speaking to the reality, your organization moves at a pace. It might sometimes be ahead of your technology project. It's probably more likely behind. So, things are being raised that potentially might have been raised earlier when you were doing your request for proposal and your requirements. I think it's okay to say, look, we won't deliver that in our first launch or our go live. It is now captured and understood. And when we get stabilized, we will look to deliver it in future. Now, that is unless it is really urgent. And I think maybe that's my last bit of advice. Listen to urgent. If something has been missed and it's an urgent priority, it does need to be addressed.
That's really good advice. And then the final thing I'll say on that is the change control process Matt told you about earlier is your friend. If with this urgent thing comes up, you then rapidly run through the change control process. The management team agree, yep, it's going to take a month longer and cost £10,000 more. Then great, it's agreed. So that's your new project now. You don't have a problem anymore. So change control is your friend. Working through the process is your friend. So these things don't have to be seen as your fault by any means, as long as you follow the tools and the techniques we're talking about. Okay, with the UAT and the steps for delivering it, I'm just going to just put this on the screen and go through it, just in the interest of time, really quickly. We have a whole process and a whole series of documents that really help with this. But first of all, it's mainly just treating it with the respect that it deserves. So essentially asking yourself the question, what is this going to be used for in the real life, in the real world? What things is every team going to need to do in this system? And then you set up a test for it. Say, right, I'm going, add a person on, renew their subscription. They've dropped dead. They've told us that they don't want to receive stuff from us anymore. Every possible scenario is then put in your test plan, and then people will have to try and make sure it does that, or report when it doesn't. And then there's the whole process of making sure that everyone's aware of what they're testing against. They've contributed to what they're testing against. And then they have a whole series of sessions with that where they're reporting the exceptions, and the supplier is with you every step of the way. So we're just going to move on from that just in the interests of time. As Matt and I have said, the plan is a vital tool, but accept that it's going to be changing as you go. And if you're keeping it up to date and sharing those changes, then it's not a problem. And then also resourcing and making sure that you've got enough people to do all of the work, and have the most contingency laden plan that you think you can tolerate. Nobody minds bringing project plans inwards. It's just when they go outwards. So don't be that optimist who's always having to report things going outwards. We find those are very important for managing your stress levels. Okay, so then as part of the implementation phase, we at Get Savvy love a checklist, as you know. So what we are saying here is essentially, if you've got all of these things in place, and you as the project manager are ticking the box and say, yes, the PID is correct, I can still deliver to the business plan, I have the budget, the supplier's plan it makes sense to me, and I've done my own plan around it, and everyone's agreed that we will have changes, and this is how we're going to manage them. And giving proper respect to UAT. If you can tick those boxes, then you're in a reasonable position to carry on from there and get into your implementation and say, all right, well, the implementation is finished. I'm just going to move on from there. And then I'm going to take a Q&A question, if you don't mind, Matt. We've got some really excellent questions. I'll just take one briefly now. This is a really quick one. Jutta, thank you very much. Can we say again what the letters RAID stand for? RAID. When I was talked about risks, actions, issues, and decisions, and Jutta is saying, some people say it's risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. So Matt, what's your view on that?
The truth is, I've seen variations, and that's fine. The point is, it's all in one place. It's almost like a briefcase. So absolutely fine to include some key information about assumptions and things like dependencies as well in your project. So it's good to expand it if you really need to. That usually depends on scale of your project.
Fantastic. And I'll just tackle one more while we're here. Matt has asked, would the budget and the planned spend be documented in the business case? And our position would be absolutely, it must be. So the business case is, and we covered this in a previous session, you might have attended, Matt, but the business case is where somebody is saying to the business, if you spend this money and this resource, you will get these benefits. It's basically do this and we'll deliver that. And that spending element of saying, right, this project is going to cost this number of £1,000 over this period of time, is what the board or finance committee or whatever Dusty group controls the money is saying that they will commit to the project in exchange for the benefits that you've. So yes, it absolutely should be there. That's version one. Sometimes those things will change as you go through, but the budget should absolutely be in the business case, and then updated as you go through the document. Thank you so much for those questions. All right, so then we'll get into the next part of the content. This is where you're planning for go live. Now, the key thing is to recognize that go live doesn't just happen by itself. It isn't just the first keystroke in your new system that isn't being done in your old system. It really takes an awful lot of preparation and run up, because what you're essentially saying is most people will be making substantial changes to their business processes. They'll be making substantial changes to how they work. And if you don't want your go live day to be a whole bunch of people complaining and saying, I don't know how to do this, or this doesn't work, then you've got to do an awful lot of run up to that. So what we're going to talk about just now is training, how to transition to the new business as usual, and then presuming you get out alive and that your project is okay, how do you close off your project? And we'll cover that in another checklist. So what we're going to do is talk about getting ready for go live. So one of the things we try and get people to recognize is that as part of you preparing to go live, um, and everyone thinks, oh, right, well, that's exciting. We're nearly there. Shall I just collapse in a heap? Um, what what we have to get across to people is that the go live, first of all, usually represents an increase in workload. The preparation for go live and even the go live itself is an increase in workload for your team. We usually recommend as well that the go live should normally be as small as possible. We're going to talk about this in a bit, but you go live with the minimum thing you can to get some experience and knowledge, and then build on top of that rapidly. And then make sure so the go live itself can be just midway through the project. You can find yourself, with months more work to do after bits of the system have gone live. So you shouldn't be looking at it as like getting to the end of a race and you collapse in a heap, and then somebody hands you a Bakerful cape and a Mars bar and you're done. It's very far from that. So please take that approach. So Matt, if I could just ask you to talk about the workload when it comes to preparation and having a good go live.
Yes, absolutely. So as you said, that the workload generally goes up and not down. My analogy is you wouldn't sort of plan a wedding and then give everyone the day off on your wedding day. So there's a few things to remember here. You'll have existing users on a new system. They will have questions, concerns, even complaints if something is resistant to them at this point in the project. Your job is to make sure you identify what are actual bugs still in the system, or glitches and things to solve immediately versus what are essentially training needs. You'll then either close your project and you will have to look at those activities soon, as Alan says, or indeed you might have future phases. And you don't actually get long as a project manager to pause and stabilize the system and your teams before you're on to activity with your supplier about what comes next. So that takes time, effort. Your supplier actually needs support to be your support post go live. They will push back if they think something isn't a glitch. It's just training. And of course, they're moving into a different mode with your organization. So they need a good communication flow back and forth. And I'd say this can be a good sign. You also see at this point more reporting requests. So people are seeing their data in the new system, they're getting used to it there, and they're asking to cut it in different ways using new reports. I think if
Absolutely.
we move on from there, Alan, I think we're going to talk a little bit about MVP. Um, if you've heard of this before, you will know it is either minimum viable product or minimal viable products. If you haven't heard this, a simple definition is it's actually releasing a rudimentary form of your new system to users early so that you provide something valuable at that stage, and then you can, of course, keep going. And I think on screen to say, why do we use MVPs? It can often be a cause of great frustration and confusion. Essentially, an MVP does raise confidence. It allows you to launch something at an early point that, of course, has to enable business continuity. It then also lets you keep going. Learning as you deliver future phases or learning as you just add new features into the system for the future. I think looking beyond that, we're going to talk about training, training, training. Again, like go live preparation itself, there is generally more to do here for a longer period than you think. And some basic tips here. You need to train everybody before go live, and there's a temptation to push some of that into the period beyond your launch. Don't do it. If people need to touch the system on day one, they need training before you go. Secondarily, you need to train people for the job they need to do on the system from day one. Some people want to learn more. Some people will say, what, I only need light touch training for the system. It really is about enabling them to do their job well on the system from day one. And of course, keep your training plan ongoing post go live. You'll have new members to the organization. You'll have people switching roles. And of course, people forget things. You need to reinforce that learning with recaps. So any capability you've got to keep going post go live is really very valuable. And then I think if we move on from there, we're going to talk a little bit about the realities of being ready. and planning your go live. So some tips here are things to watch out for. Start early, as I said earlier about implementation. Generally around the time when you shift from development into your testing, start to get people together around what go live can look like. You obviously then need people to be available. So don't pick Christmas, don't pick public holidays, don't pick when your organization's very busy or indeed your supplier has got other major go lives. Pick a time when people are going to be available to support the launch. And this is like a theatre production, you'll have a dry run of this in a certain way with your supplier, technical checks before you go. And you will have Get Savvy provides this a go live checklist, so all of the steps you need to take to have a safe launch. It is literally like launching a rocket. User acceptance testing or UAT is critical here. You will have persistent bugs, so you have to make key decisions towards the end on whether you can really go live if it's safe enough, or you have to get the bugs resolved before you go. And probably these final points, if you have any doubts, if your team does, or your senior management team is serious questions, pause. A wise person once said to me, go big if you need a deferral. I think Alan indicated that. If it will take 6 months to get all of your testing and training finished and then go again for a go live, pick 6 months. Don't sort of drip feed deferrals to your organization. And I
Yes.
think it's our last point here, Alan. A bad go live will never be forgotten. It is largely worse than a deferral. So, two quick analogies. These sea divers who jump into the sea, they're not halfway down going, I wonder if I've trained enough to land safely here. They've done all that preparation. And if you're a pilot launching a plane, you want your engineers to have fixed everything before you take off, because actually replacing the engine of a Boeing at 600 miles an hour is very challenging, if impossible.
That,
I
that
think
that
you get the
sounds
picture.
scary. Yeah. So great. Look, I can't resist it. We've got some really great questions that have come in on the Q&A. So let's just do another couple of those. We've had a kind of very bleak one here, which is so what if you just run out of money? So you run out of money. Somebody somewhere has said this will be done for this amount of money. The board has gone, oh, all right then. And of course, then you run out of money at some point during the project, and a new urgent request comes in. Now, my initial thoughts on that are always to remember that you, as the project manager, it's not your responsibility to do everything and to fund everything and to, your job is to make sure people are in an informed position and to do the best you can with the resources that you have. So if this new urgent inquiry has come in, then something has gone wrong with the budgeting process at the beginning. Maybe there was a lack of transparency between early users and the supplier. Maybe something's changed in the real world. All you can do with that is to use the tools that we've been talking about, change management process, reporting, sharing it with the management team, and then discuss what can be done. Can we defer it? Can we go to the supplier and say, can we negotiate on this? All of those things. Make sure it's a shared problem and not just on you. I've got another one for you, Matt, if you don't mind.
Yes?
What is your experience of having the supplier on the project board, or not having the supplier on the project board? So there are pros and cons to each. We've both seen it done different ways. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, Again, because of time, and you contact me or contact Get Savvy after, have them in, manage them in the room, always give them a pre-brief as well as your internal team, and always have a section which is kind of in camera. It is for your internal team only. I think having them outside of the room sets up this negative trust factor, or it can make things exclusionary. And practically, you're sharing information once to then go and share it with your supplier afterwards. So I feel having them in the room with boundaries is best.
Fantastic. That's really, I 100% concur. Great. Well, let's move. Let's go through. We'll tackle some more questions from the Q&A at the end. All right. So capabilities you need for go live. We keep saying it doesn't happen by itself. So first of all, well before you're up and running with your new system. So your job as a project manager is to think not just they press the first key on in the new system. Now I'm done and run out the door. Your job really is to make sure your organization is going to be okay from the new system. Is going to benefit from it. And by the way, anyone complaining later, they're going to blame you. So it's in your interest to make sure you're doing all of these things. So well before you're up and running, need to consider is you might be the only one in the organization doing this. Need to consider what will be required. Okay, so the new system is up and running. Who's going to be looking after it? Who are people going to report problems to? Because maybe you're not there anymore. Who's got the skill set to manage these meetings and manage the supplier? And who's going to manage the supplier in terms of ongoing changes, ongoing maintenance with the system? So asking these questions, and sharing the questions with the management team. Do we have the resources to manage that in-house? How can we make sure we're getting the best out of the system so it doesn't just become an old system very quickly through neglect? What about new leavers and joiners, and who's going to keep up with all of the training and forming a user group? So if you're asking these questions early and then working through solutions, that should be done well before you'll go live and not some afterthought later. Some key considerations before you go live is making sure things like there's a guide for people. You're going to go the potentially the supplier's implementation team is going to go and work on the next project. So these guides need to be there to help people get started and not just rely on training. There's a kind of misperception that the knowledge within the organization is growing like fine wine, over years. And reality is that when people are handed over the system in most organizations, it's over there. You can just click that, you'll be fine. And the knowledge isn't growing; it's actually getting lost. So you should be making sure that that is developed and there's a process and somebody has responsibility for it. Money, money, money. These systems do need ongoing changes. They do need ongoing investment. So ideally, as part of the business case, someone said, 15% of the budget, we'll spend it every year on improvements and keeping it up to date. If they haven't, then I'm afraid part of your role as project manager is to point this out to people that it can't all be, stopped at the go live day and then expect everything to carry on working for years after that. And then we love a user group. So as part of the go live preparation, getting people together in a room from different business teams and saying, right, we're going to meet every 6 weeks. We're going to raise, any issues, going to raise your ambitions and things that you'd love to do now. Positive things can come out because, I didn't know I could have data so easily. Could we have it this way, this way, and this way? Could we have these other automations? Because they're fantastic too. And it just makes sure that the organization is owning the system and that it keeps up to date and keeps fresh as you go. So, and then drawing your project to a close. This is often forgotten about, but we find it to be really important, partly for learning for the next project, but partly for thanking and making sure everything's tied up. So part of it is then recognizing that this is an activity that you need to do, and you need to close it formally, and you need to make sure that things are arranged so that partly because you're not getting the blame for everything later. It also means that the organization is recognizing the work that's been done, and then so that the because the project team is likely to be gone, etc. So that everything's tagged and bagged and filed away, so that you're then able to manage further stages of the project if necessary. The organization's got what it needs to carry on. So how do you close out a project? So first of all, there's a lessons learned process that has to take place, very full and frank, and what everyone has to know about what went well and what didn't go well on it. So we have a whole template and series of processes around this, but we do find it to be very important. Celebrate, thank people. People have worked hard, people have done things on top of their day job. If you want their help next time, be nice about it and take the time and effort to do that. And then, of course, it's the case of wrapping up. Some people will be on to the next project, the next day. So making sure that everyone is recognized for that, and that you've got what you need from people, and that it's all left in a good state. We find that to be terrifically important. Okay, scenario. I think we've just literally got 1 minute for this. But so. Managing the go live or no go live. Matt's talked about changing the airplane engine in mid-flight, so maybe not do that. So when you're trying to decide, is the organization ready for a go live? I think one of the things on point one there. Matt made a really good point. People will not remember that a go live was delayed by a time if it's managed properly. People won't remember that for long, particularly if you've anticipated it sometime in advance. People will remember forever a bad go live. And if you've never experienced a bad go live, you really, really don't want to. Everyone's shouting at each other, everyone's blaming each other. You're in the firing line. So making sure that you are ready to go live and delaying it if necessary is the wise course on all of this. So part of that is the testing process and making sure that tests are signed off, etc. Part of it, as Matt said, is the pilot's checklist. If you're not able to put ticks to it in all of the right areas, then delay is better than just risking it. And then finally, I'll say share the problem. Share the problem with everyone else and say, here is the factors of the decision. Do we want to go live or not with these risks in place and these pressures that we've got? And then as a shared decision with the management team, you can then decide to go live or not. Okay, so to summarize all of that, prepare that go live means loads of work and focusing on your end users and making sure there's lots of overhead there and making sure that lots of reporting and lots of anticipation. Make sure your pilot's checklist is in place. I think we will send you this checklist, but this is your opportunity to make sure you're ready to go live. And if these things are not in place, do not do it. Delay is better than a disastrous go live. So these checklists are your friend to make sure that you don't have a problem. I'm going to skip the quiz in interests of just going to tackle some more of these fantastic Q&A questions in the last minute or so that we've got. So we've got a question here, Matt, on the Q&A, which is Chloe is saying that the project team are often the stakeholders who are both the customers of the project and who are extremely busy themselves. And of course, we've seen that where the project team are made up of the membership manager, the events manager, marketing, etc. And so Chloe is saying, although I've used project plans, RAID logs, etc., she finds they're rarely read and it requires meetings and chasing to get anything done. Are there any tips for streamlining documentation that is engaging and that you're not the only person reading them as the project manager?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of quick things. I think focus on an action log, not heavy minutes and transcript, because action log is simple for people to absorb. It's a real discipline, but commit people to action at the end of your team meeting with your project team, and then open your next team meeting with how are we doing on action. Some people forget that, and actually just good communication between meetings. There is always the element of needing to G people up and keep them going in terms of their actions. And look, you can escalate to your senior management team if someone is really behind and not pulling their weight. You can have a conversation with them, but you might need to say just simply, factually, these actions are behind. We need to take some senior action.
I agree. And then finding a way of highlighting it to those individuals that's relevant to those individuals. So I think, Chloe, you're right. Most people are not going to read all of the project documents or the wider project documents. So I'm afraid there's an overhead of you on you to make it relevant and targeted towards particular groups, and then you might get more take up on that. So then we've got someone saying a lessons learned exercise can be undermined by people not really being honest. Because things have gone wrong, maybe they missed something, maybe they were just too busy. And then secondly, that the top tips don't really make it into your learnings for the next project. So what do you find is best, Matt, for getting the best out of a wrap up and lessons learned exercise?
It's almost like a trust exercise. If you can get people together and start your lessons learned meeting with some ground rules and some kind of safety checks for how openly we're going to discuss this without blame or retribution, I found that really works. And I think, again, like the actions from one meeting to the next, if you can have a PMO, if you've got that, brilliant. If you don't have a PMO, encourage your project managers when they start their next team meeting, go back to the lessons logs from previous projects. It's that simple. Start your next project there. I think another reality is if anyone can write a report of key themes from previous projects in your organization, people might be more likely to absorb the learnings from a report than from specific lessons. documents from projects.
Fantastic. Look, we're going to do one more minute and we'll overrun fractionally because there's such a lot of pain in these Q&A questions. They're really great. So one of them says, the challenge is that your initial go live, your MVP, is then when the project is seen to end and you've run out of time, money, and energy and goodwill. I like that goodwill one. How do you make sure the resources keep coming to work on the project after that initial go live? I'll answer that one just really briefly. It is about that anticipation. So you're saying very much to your stakeholders, your management team, your project team, this is just a notable date. It's not the end of the project, and making sure that people understand that. And that the work carries on from there. And in fact, the work is likely to carry on from there. And if you don't get those resources, then you're going to end up with complaints and negativity, and you'll undermine all of the good work that's gone behind. So all of that anticipation and making sure that people understand it is your friend there. Final question: scope management. What is the threshold when to take changes to scope to that level of process? That could easily take us 6 to 8 weeks. I'm not sure I fully understand the language there, but I will say that with scope management, the key thing and changes to scope, there tend to be two things. One is making sure your scope is fully agreed, and I know it can take a long time to get scope understood and agreed. But it must be done, or else you're being measured against something that is moving around all over the place, so you can't possibly succeed. And then the second thing is when there is a change to scope, change control, and making sure that's signed off by everybody, so it's not your fault. If the organization agrees to a different project and signs it off, then that's just your new project, so you're not in trouble for that. So fantastic. I'm going to pause there on the Q&A. Thanks so much for such great questions. And I'm just going to wrap up. I'll thank everybody for coming. We're going to send you everything from the session. Please do take advantage of your discount code on the course. It could save your life. And then we'll be providing some templates to you, and we'll invite you to join the DSABI community. And finally, we look forward to seeing you on the next session, which is not the training series, but it's a webinar on how to empower your internal teams for a successful technology project with a real focus on the people side and making sure you get the best out of your colleagues on the project. Matt, can I thank you so much for your fantastic insights and advice?
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I hope everyone's got a lot of learning out of this course. It's very, very valuable.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody. See you on the next webinar.